Welcome to From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debi Silber, and today's guest is Tricia Nelson. Tricia lost 50 pounds by identifying and healing the underlying causes of her emotional eating. Tricia has spent nearly 30 years researching the hidden causes of the addictive personality. She's an emotional eating expert and author of the #1 best-selling book, Heal Your Hunger: 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now. She's also the host of the popular podcast, The Heal Your Hunger Show. A highly regarded speaker and coach, Tricia has been featured on NBC, CBS, KTLA, Fox, and Discovery Health. Not only is she a brilliant emotional eating expert, she's going to talk about the most common personality characteristics that make us eat emotionally in the first place. You'll be shaking your head and thinking, yep, that's me, as you listen. I can't wait for you to meet Tricia. Here we go. Oh, I am so excited because we have the absolute world's leading emotional eating expert, but she's also a dear friend. Tricia Nelson is with us here today. Hi, Tricia.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks so much for joining us. So, when you think of emotional eating, you may think, whoa, this is like a weight loss show or whatever. Everything that we talk about here has to do with betrayal. But when we're betrayed, we're in so much pain, and we're doing things to soothe, numb, calm, distract. And I imagine that's where emotional eating comes into it. But start with telling us your journey, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. So I was an emotional eater from the get-go, and I struggled with my weight. So I loved food. I loved everything about food. I loved to cook. I loved to serve it to people. I loved to, anything, TV, online, anything. So, but anyway, it was a big problem for me, and especially because I would gain weight really easily. And, I didn't mind eating, but I did mind being fat. So I grew up as a fat girl, I like to say, and it really tortured me because I was bigger than my friends. I had issues with just my self-esteem. And, I went into adulthood that way. And by age of 21, I was 50 pounds overweight. So it really affected me, and I hated my body. I hated myself. I just, the self-esteem issues was a real problem for me. And so, I was always trying diets, and this is what you do. If you're overweight, you go on a diet, right? It makes sense. Lose weight, exercise, eat less, exercise more. That's what everybody does. But I couldn't do it. Like I would try, but I would always gain the weight back. So even if I was successful for a time, I'd gain the weight back, and I was in good company. 98% of all diets fail. So it was really frustrating for me. And I tried so many different things. I like to say pills, potions, and lotions, and everything under the sun. And it wasn't until I started to address the emotional eating that I really was able to lose the weight and keep it off. And I have now, by the grace of God, for several decades. But that was the missing piece. The emotional eating was what was, not addressing it was what the problem. And once I started addressing that and the emotions that drove my eating, then I got somewhere with my weight, and I didn't need to use food as an anesthetic. I had to deal with those underlying causes, and then I didn't have to use food. I didn't have to turn to food. Food wasn't my solace. It wasn't my comfort. It was like I was eating to live instead of living to eat.
You talk about the difference between emotional eating and being a food addict. What's the difference there? Because that's a distinguishing factor there. I had no idea that those were two different things.
So my feeling is that all people are emotional eaters. I think God made us to have an emotional attachment to food. And so we like to eat, it's enjoyable, it's pleasurable. There are such things as comfort foods. So that's normal. So we are emotionally, tied in with food, but I consider it to be a spectrum. And so you're somewhere on the spectrum. On the low end is, you enjoy food. The high end is you're food addicted. And I was definitely food addicted. What does that look like? Well, it means I would have binges. I would, any kind of upset, any kind of emotions that were troubling to me, I'd dive into the food. I'd get my goodies. I'd sit in front of the TV and I'd eat. And once you're eating something sweet, then you have something salty. And I would go overboard to the point of feeling sick. And then I'd have to, some people purge. I was not a purger. Some people purge to get rid of their food. Some people run 5 miles. They've got the exercise thing going on to compensate for their overeating. I just gained weight. Like I didn't have a whole lot of strength to try to combat what I ate. So I would just gain weight and feel terrible, and again, try the diets here and there. So, but food addiction is really like, it gets dark. Like, when we're in that binging mode, and not everybody who's a food addict binges per se, but they eat, large quantities of food. And it's not just the types of foods, it's also, amounts, but it's also just, if somebody isn't a binger, sometimes it's just eating all the carbs and the sugar. Like it's the ingredients that give them the anesthetic. And so, the difference between an emotional eater and a food addict is where you are on the spectrum, how far you go with it, how much, loss of control you have to dial it back. Some people will have a binge and then they'll exercise more and they won't have another binge for a while because they're able to control themselves. But not everybody can control themselves. I certainly couldn't. And so, I'd have a bad night, but then the next day when I intended to get back on track, it would continue. And so several days, down the road, I'd be still in that terrible cycle. So it's really, where you're on the spectrum has to do with, how easily you can dial back, how easily you can get back in control. And if you can't, then you're more on the high end. And I literally have a quiz that will teach people, like they can get a personalized score on where they are on that spectrum, because it does, where you are on the spectrum will determine what steps you need to take to overcome it.
And it's amazing because as you're saying this, I remember so clearly. Well, first of all, I grew up, you would eat when you were happy, you're sad, you're confused, you're lonely, you're bored, all of that. And then I remember back in the day, years ago, I used to be a runner and I would run. Imagine this, I would run between 7 and 10 miles a day and I was gaining weight. And I was like, what the heck? How can you gain that much weight? How can you gain weight when you're running that much? And I was eating boxes and boxes and boxes of dry cereal. I remember this is when I was going back for my master's degree, and I would study and I would just sit there and eat. And, those are such empty calories. They don't even register, but they did. They don't register. I never felt full. I felt you keep going until you just feel stuffed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I lived that way for years. And it's such a self-defeating feeling, and it's like to lose control, to be enslaved to food, is so miserable. And it's also a very secretive thing. I mean, people aren't talking about, they're trying to act normal and look normal, but it's usually behind closed doors, alone late at night, those times, when we're really eating so much, and the sense of shame and guilt that comes with that is so detrimental to our overall self-esteem and our relationships. There's like a barrier between us, not just a barrier of fat, but a barrier of, guilt and shame between us and other people. And the loneliness that comes with it is so devastating, feeling like we're the only ones who have done this kind of thing, and how could we ever tell anybody? So it's so much more detrimental than people realize.
And these are the emotions that happen when we are emotionally eating, but then there are the emotions that have us emotionally eat in the first place. So let's go there. What are some emotions that you see that maybe you experienced or a lot of your clients typically come to you with that had them start emotionally eating in the first place?
Great question. I've really, over my 30 years of research and personal experience and helping, thousands of people with this problem, I've identified something I call the PEP test. And PEP is an acronym, and the P stands for painkiller. So food is used as a form of really anesthetizing pain, usually emotional pain, but sometimes physical pain if somebody's has a chronic problem or illness. But it's usually emotional pain, and this can come from pain from our childhood, certainly pain from betrayal, pain from being in a relationship that's not right for us, one that's abusive or neglectful, or, dishonest, and pain from a job, maybe that's the wrong fit for us. So there's many forms of pain, but we use food as a painkiller. And of course, in this case, definitely betrayal and mistrust and that kind of thing. And it does a good job. I mean, that's why we love carbs and sugar, because they're heavier, they're dense, and they do anesthetize pain. That's why we're doing that. That's why we're binging, on food and on TV, is we just don't want to feel that pain. The E in the PEP stands for escape. And so we have fears and insecurities that we want to escape from. And so that really drives our eating. It's like, so much of the time emotional eaters are really responsible. Like we're not like the drunk, the alcoholic who's missing appointments and blowing up their life. Emotional eaters are typically type A's. We're, overeaters are overdoers. We're doing a lot in the world. But sometimes we just get so tired and we're so sick of being responsible. So it's like we get our goodies out, we sit in front of the TV. It's like we want to shut the world out. It's like I wanted to escape all the responsibility and all the pressures that are on me. The third is something people don't think of, but we use food as a form of punishment. And that comes from guilt. So there's so many lurking, hidden feelings of guilt that we have. And, we don't see that when we're eating. We're thinking we're rewarding ourselves. So it's like, I've been working so hard, I deserve this. But a lot of times there are deeper senses of guilt that we don't know how to put a name to. And that can drive us to eat and really punish ourselves. And the reason why I say it's a punishment is because while we start out trying to reward ourselves, the way we lose control, the way we overeat, the way we end up feeling sick and bloated and fat, and we don't want to be with our friends because of a binge we had the night before. We want to just pull the curtains and do a little sheet therapy. That is punishment. We're doing that literally to ourselves. Nobody did that to us. So it begs the question, what am I feeling so bad about? Why am I punishing myself like this? And so pain, fear, and guilt are the three drivers that if you take the PEP test, you'll be able to identify.
So now because that's so interesting, do we know when we're binging if that, like we think it's a reward? Oh, well, I had a hard day, I'm just rewarding myself. Do we know subconsciously that that's what's going on? That there is this. Because obviously when we feel horrible, we can understand it then, but we don't realize we're doing this.
No, I mean, that's a thing. And just somebody listening to this is going to heighten their awareness. This is probably somebody who hears this is never going to quite be as, in denial as before. And it's hopefully going to start the pattern of healing by just recognize, wow, there's more to it than I just like chocolate. Like we think we just like chocolate. I thought I just like food. The idea of being an emotional eater, that was driven by these dark, feelings, it didn't mesh with me at first, but once it was brought to my attention, then I could see, oh yeah, like there's a direct link between how I'm feeling and what I'm eating. A client of mine said, she started working with me in one of my programs. She's said, yeah, my son said to me, he was listening to the recording that she was listening to of me talking. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh yeah, Mom, you do that. Every time you're upset, you're eating. And she's like, what? He actually notices this. This is a real thing, and it's like, we're so unconscious of it. We think we just like food, but the minute you start, having it come to your awareness, you'll be able to look and see those patterns. And it's, the guilt and pain. I mean, some people are like, I really, I'm totally unaware of it, but that's why there's other, things that people can do to start getting aware and start tapping into their emotions and really, unloading their emotions so they aren't ending up with somebody with their head in the refrigerator.
Right. And to some people, because, there are those people who just say, I just like food. That's it. I'm eating because I just like food. And that's the end of it. But you thought that was the case with you. And then you said that wasn't.
Yeah. It was totally not on my radar to be an emotional eater. But, but somebody has to if they want to lose weight, they have to wake up to emotional eating. It is 98% of all diets fail. Like the diet will fail you. Like it will not work. The exercise plan, you will stop going to the gym. Like the emotions are powerful and they sabotage us, if we don't have a healthy way to address them and heal them. Like they will take over, and if we have this pattern of eating over them, that's where we'll end up. And so even though it seems like a strange idea, if somebody really lets me talk to them and they hear this over time, they're totally going to realize there's a connection. And and again, it's not an indictment. I mean, everybody does it. It's just that if you want different results, if you're unhappy with your weight, if you're just generally unhappy and can't move beyond where you are right now, when you start addressing this, the benefits of it is that you just awaken in so many ways. When you start addressing your emotions and unloading them and having a health. See, when we bury our emotions, we bury them alive. So it's not like they go away. Yeah, sure, we're not aware of them, but they're still wreaking havoc in our lives. They're still affecting our health. They're still causing us resentment. They're still, we've got a chip on our shoulder. We're still, we're walking around with this, dark cloud over our head when we don't need to, because there's a way to address it. But when you just, bury them with food, then we have the weight problem, and we feel sick from the food. And we've still got those emotions that are unaddressed.
And it's like this big cycle, right? The circle of I binge, I feel bad that I binge, that sets me up for a binge, and right, and it just goes like that. Is there a certain emotion that you see more than others that would make someone emotionally eat?
Yeah, I have really identified 24 personality traits. I call it the anatomy of the emotional eater. And
let's talk about that. I love that.
Yeah, there are 24 personality traits that I've identified in the emotional eater that are really, they are what sabotage people. And so again, it's not just about eating too much or eating wrong foods. We are living our lives in such a way that we are creating stress that we stress eat over. And it's these personalities. Now, these personality traits, we develop them usually at a young age, and they're like survival skills that we developed. But then they have perpetuated the stress, that we then that drives us to overeat. So the top one, Debi, is being a people pleaser. So emotional eaters and women in general are totally people pleasers. And part of it's because we don't have the self-esteem that we should have, meaning we weren't given, we didn't grow up with a healthy sense of ourselves. And therefore, we're looking for approval from outside of ourselves. We don't have it for ourselves. So we're consummate people pleasers, hoping that, if I do enough, if I say yes to the projects nobody else will take on, if I do my kids' homework, if I'm running around, the head of all these different committees, hoping for this adulation that will fill us, fill that empty hole in our soul, then we'll feel full, then we will be satisfied. And I'm telling you, as a reformed people pleaser, there's no such thing as enough, and plus nobody's ever pleased to the extent that I think they're going to be or imagine they're going to be. So it's a perfect prescription for a binge. Like you're not only like exhausted from running yourself ragged trying to get approval, but then you're resentful because nobody's approving of you the way you expected them to. And then you go home and you have the I deserve it binge. Like nobody else is approving of me. I'm going to, reward myself instead. So
there are so many women shaking their head right now. Like, yep, that's me. You nailed it.
Yeah, it's
absolutely.
Really
that's amazing.
It's a disease in and of itself. And it is never ending. It's a bottomless pit, trying to get approval because it doesn't fill us. We have to have it for ourselves, and we have to have boundaries, on our time, and realize that the elusive approval that we expect to get is, it doesn't fill us. We have to keep getting it, and it's so much better if we start saying, it's not paying off for me. I'd rather develop it for myself, and setting boundaries in our time and saying no to things actually builds our self-esteem in the moment, because in the moment we're saying, no, I matter, my time matters, and I'm going to put me first instead of you first, and I love,
I love that you said that. And here's where we have this case of yes and no confusion. We say yes to all the things that bring us away from really peace and joy. And we say no to right? It's this, we say yes to things we shouldn't, no to things that we shouldn't. And if we get our yeses and nos straight, and the no is very hard to say, right? But those 30 seconds that you could say no to, look what you've secured.
Yes.
Absolutely wonderful. So could you give us some more?
Yeah. So another one for emotional eaters is being a deep feeler. Like we are emotional beings. Like emotional eaters are super emotional. That's why we have this reaction. And so much of the time, like I know for myself, excuse me, I would kind of hate that part of me that I was so sensitive and so deeply emotional. And I kind of saw it as a liability. It's not a liability if you know how to deal with it. So it's not a bad thing if you know how to deal with your emotions. It's actually a really beautiful thing. I mean, we're the people that people feel like they can talk to. We're the ones that people go to when they have a breakup or when, life is hard. They consider us to be a good friend. Now, again, that gets into trouble if we don't have some kind of boundaries on our time, and we're always the shoulder you can cry on, that becomes a problem. And we end up having a refuel. All that we give to other people, we have to refuel with food. But the bottom line is it's okay to be a deep feeler. It's a beautiful thing if you know how to process your emotions and have a healthy way of dealing with emotions so that, you're not overloaded. So you're not absorbing the pain of the world. And then using food for support. So that's definitely a big one. And I would say, so go ahead.
I was going to say, and I love how you phrase that when you just exhaust yourself by giving, you refuel with food. But that's the issue. That's the challenge right there. Yes. Love that. Okay, keep going.
Really is. There's so many others. I mean,
you can't get to all of them, but just pick your favorites, the ones you see the most.
So another one is people are afraid to speak up for themselves. And this is part of the people pleasing, but we have not learned to use our voice. And so much of the trouble we get into with food has to just be, it's about lack of self-care. Like we don't speak up and say, no, that restaurant doesn't work for me. Like I'm going to feel sick if I eat there, or I'm going to binge if I eat there, or gee, I can't eat at 7:00 at night because I get too hungry. I'd rather, can we set the, our dinner date for 6 or 5:30? And, there's just practical things that we don't do in terms of taking care of ourselves. Or I can't work a 12-hour day because I will be exhausted. And when I'm exhausted, I turn to food, for energy. So it's like we have to start being aware of our, what our needs are, and we have to speak up and take care of ourselves. And so much of the time, emotional eaters don't communicate properly. We're very passive aggressive. We want people to be mind readers, and we're just afraid to speak up, and that has to change. I teach something in my program called 10 secrets to expressing yourself with confidence, just so people can learn how to literally speak up and start saying what they need. And so many problems in our relationships come from our lack of doing this. And so it's a big thing that we need to learn. And when we do, then we don't have to be, again, anesthetizing our pain with food.
Oh, that's so great. So can you give us an example of a client you had? They walked in as an emotional eater, never thinking they could ever break the pattern. And how did they leave?
Well, it happens all the time, thankfully. But the key is all these things I'm talking about. The key is getting off of the diet mentality. Stop trying to lose weight and start addressing emotional eating. The weight loss happens automatically. If you're not emotionally eating, if you're eating 3 meals a day and you're not snacking all day, and you learn to take care of yourself, you learn to meditate, you learn to, have a morning ritual that fuels you, that gives you the energy and helps you tap into that divine spirit within. When you do all that and you're centered, then you have a much better shot going through the day. And so that's really what my clients experience, is that they're starting, the biggest thing, Debi, is self-care. They're learning to take care of themselves so that they don't have to end up just leaning on food all the time because they're so, devoid of energy, devoid of self-esteem and self-confidence.
And, bringing it back to betrayal, we just don't have the bandwidth to take care of ourselves or even to consider self-care when we're reeling from a betrayal. But it's only when we've made sense and made meaning and made a new life after the fact do we say, okay, now we can consider, ourselves and eat a little bit healthier, and not in a way even to lose weight, but in a way to nurture and in a way to show us some self-love and self-care. What do you want to make sure everyone knows before we wrap up?
Just that you're worthy of that care, and that care is, that is the key to healing. Nobody is going to do it for us. Like, we have to, first of all, you got to get support. So reach out for support for sure. But, you are worthy of taking time for yourself. You're worthy of giving to yourself instead of always giving to your kids. Like, you are worth that time. Investing in yourself that way is going to pay off for everybody around you. Self-care is not selfish. It's really the most selfless thing you could do, because then you have something to give and resources to pull from as you're out there in the world sharing your gifts.
Beautiful. And there are so many women I see women more than men struggling with this. We're so conditioned to put ourselves last and take care of everybody else. But then by the time it's our turn, we just have nothing left. So where does somebody start? Of course, I want to tell them exactly where they could find you. But here they are. They just realized by listening to you, wow, I am an emotional eater. What would you suggest? What do they do?
Yeah, definitely. I would say take the quiz first and find out where they are on the spectrum. And then they're going to have a very specific prescription on, what action steps to take. So that's really the first step. And then just realize that you're not weak if you're reaching out for help with this. People always want to do it themselves, pull themselves up by the bootstrap. Emotional eating is something you cannot overcome on your own, especially if you're in the food addiction, side of the spectrum. It's impossible to do this alone. You have to eat 3 times a day. It's like taking the tiger out of the cage and petting the kitty and trying to put it back in. Food is the hardest addictive substance on the planet because we can't just stop eating. And so getting help, getting support, and also getting a proven system for overcoming this is going to be so, so important. But, get rid of the idea that you can do this alone, because you can't. Chances are you've put in a really good college effort so far, and it hasn't worked. And, just sort of coming to that place of acceptance of needing help. And that's true with betrayal in general. Like, stop keeping everything to yourself, start reaching out and getting the support, and learning from others who have done this on how to actually walk this path makes it so much easier. It just will get you through to the other side so much faster. And there's so many beautiful benefits when we reach out and we get support and we have community with other people who have gone through the same struggles. There's so many beautiful benefits that we don't even realize are coming our way.
Absolutely. And there's something very similar to betrayal where it seems with emotional eating, there's shame. There's no shame in getting the support, getting the help. And everybody who is in your groups, they're all struggling with the same thing and working through the same thing. So wonderful.
Yeah.
How do we learn more about you? Where do we go?
Healyourhunger.com is the best place to go. Heal, Heal, healyourhunger.com.
Oh, Tricia, thank you so much. I know you helped so many people with what you shared today.
Thank you for having me, Debbie, and thanks for the beautiful work that you do in the world. I'm just so glad that you're here sharing with others and helping others heal.
How great was Tricia? I loved how she explained the difference between an emotional eater and a food addict. I also loved how she gave us the top personality types who would typically binge and the reasons why they reach for food when they're looking for comfort or relief. Stay in touch with Tricia by going to healyourhunger.com, and we'll have her links in the show notes at pbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway. Just as we need support when it comes to healing from betrayal, we need support to end emotional eating. It can be done. I've done it, Tricia's done it, and you can too if you're struggling and feeling like you'll never stop. It's exhausting and frustrating, so get in touch with Tricia if you're an emotional eater and let her help you. And let me help you too. Head over to pbtinstitute.com to receive my gift of how your biggest crisis reveals your greatest gift. And let us support you. Go to Facebook and join our group, Women Hacking Betrayal, where we give information, tools, and support to help you move forward and heal once and for all. Can't wait to be with you next time, and here's to your breakthrough.